So good evening. My name is Benicio Rael. I serve as the Director for Latinx Student Services. Before we get started, I want to make sure that I acknowledge and really give thanks to our sponsors from Latinx Student Services and our sponsorship from the Gender Institute for Teaching and Advocacy at the Metropolitan State University of Denver. I also want to acknowledge our collaborators, the Chicana Studies Department at MSU Denver, the Center for Multicultural Excellence and Inclusion at MSU Denver, and Student Life from the Community College of Denver. Before I hand this over to our facilitator, Nettie Rodriguez, I want to ensure that we are honoring and acknowledging the land on which we reside and where the Auraria campus was built. And in the years leading up to the 1800s, 169 acres of Auraria campus was home to the Arapaho and Cheyenne tribes. In 1858, before Denver was Denver, Auraria was established by miners led to...
Yes, that's the one. Okay, on our paper, what's 3 of them?
Sorry. Auraria was established by miners led by the Russell brothers, who were originally from Auraria, Georgia, and mining town established in 1828. The term Auraria means gold by Latin. By 1859, a small neighborhood containing houses and various businesses was established just off the banks of Cherry Creek. Denver City was established, and in 1860, Auraria and Denver decided to merge. Together, they became known as West Denver. As time went on, working class and middle class families and businesses, such as brewery, mills, and warehouses, occupied the city, occupied West Denver. In the 1920s, West Denver's population shifted from mostly European occupants to Latinx. The new population from Mexico, New Mexico, and southern Colorado. In 1965, the South Platte River flooded and put most of Auraria underwater. After the flood, it was decided to redevelop Auraria. With the redevelopment came the idea to modernize Denver's oldest establishment, Auraria, thus beginning the combination of 3 colleges on one campus. By 1972, the residents of Auraria were relocated and the campus became completed in 1976. Acknowledging this land, acknowledging that we reside on the homelands of indigenous peoples is an important step in recognizing the history and the original stewards of these lands. Land acknowledgements must extend far beyond words. The United States has worked hard to erase the narratives of indigenous people over time. Land acknowledgement statements can help to remind us of the history, the contributions, and the sacrifices Native people have made. We honor and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute nations. This area, specifically the confluence of the Platte and Cherry Creek rivers, was the epicenter for trade, information sharing, planning for the future, community, family, and ally building, as well as conducting healing ceremonies for over 45 indigenous nations, including the Lakota, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, Shoshone, Zuni, and Hopi, among others. We must recognize indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land, and these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard. Remember the ties these nations still have to their traditional homelands. Let us acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and pay our respects to the diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land. Let us give thanks to all the tribal nations and the ancestors of this place. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Benicio Rael. I serve as the Director for Latinx Student Services at the University of Colorado, Denver, and it is a pleasure to be with you tonight and also to embrace our beautiful culture this evening and celebrating Dia de los Muertos. I'm going to pass it over to our co-host and a very good friend of mine, Nettie Rodriguez, who will introduce our guest tonight, as well as our chef, So thank you, Nettie, and I'm passing it to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Bienvenidos, excuse me. Feliz Dia de los Muertos. It's lovely to see some of you in costume today. And yeah, super excited to be here as one of the co-hosts for this evening's program. I'm going to be your moderator this evening, so a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. If you have questions for the chef during her class, you're welcome to put them in the chat box. I will make sure that questions reach Lola during the session. Additionally, once we turn it over to Lola, please feel free to switch your view, if it isn't already, to speaker view. So this will allow you to be able to see the cooking class fully on the screen versus in gallery view where you can see sort of everybody's boxes. We are going to be doing some raffle giveaways, including a couple of things from Lola's Mercado, and we're going to be raffling off some gift cards to King Supers for those of you who maybe want to pick up some ingredients to try out this recipe, which we're all really excited to see. We do ask that if you are a student of Auraria, or if you are not a student of Auraria, to center students who we know are really struggling right now during this raffle. But we'll let you know a little bit more once we get there. Let's see. I think other than that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce. Is that a question? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest for this evening. Yeah, super excited. So. Lola Dweck is the founder and publisher of Lola's Cocina, a food and travel blog dedicated to sharing Mexico's rich culinary traditions and cherished family recipes. Lola develops original recipes for national brands and teaches themed cooking classes while educating her audience about Mexican culture. She also launched Lola's Mercadito, an online marketplace specializing in gourmet and personally curated items that celebrate Mexican food and culture. Her salsa negra was named one of the best jarred salsas in the country by Mexican food experts in Thrillist.com and has been highlighted in many interviews and publications such as OprahMag.com, New York Magazine, Thrillist, as I mentioned, Chowhound, Parents Latina, Me Too, Red Tricycle, Diestes Provoke Weekly, Bilingual Avenue, and Super Mama's podcast. Sounds like a really fun podcast to me. Recently, Lola was also named one of 12 Latina influencers to follow on Instagram by OprahMag.com. She was recognized as one of 14 Latino-owned businesses disrupting the food industry by Me Too, and Provoke Weekly named her an everyday Latina leader making a difference. Lola is a California native with a dual master's degree in business administration and Latin American studies and currently lives in Highlands Ranch, Colorado with her husband and her bilingual children. I'm super excited to kick this cooking class off. I hope you all are super excited to kick this class off. And just as a friendly reminder, if you can please keep your mics muted unless you want to jump in with a question, which reminds me, you can also hop in and ask Lola a question if you would like by unmuting yourself, or you can, as I mentioned before, drop it in the chat. All right, without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Lola.
Thank you, Nettie. Thank you so much for introducing me and for having me. Welcome everyone to my kitchen. I'm just going to give a brief overview. First, I'm going to give a little bit more of a personal introduction, and then we're going to go over the ingredients we're working with today and the dishes we're going to be making. And then we're just going to get started cooking. And once we're done with our tostadas, I will walk you to my home altar, which is in my office in the other room right next door. And that's going to be pretty much everything we covered today. Make sure you are paying attention because some of our raffle questions will center on what I discuss in today's class. I can ask anything about the ingredients or what we're cooking to things that I talk about regarding my altar. So make sure you're listening because I'm going to be asking some trivia. And okay, so just a little bit about me. I have been cooking since I was about 8 years old. For us, it was always something that brought us together in my family. It wasn't really a chore or something that we dreaded. I loved it since I was young. I ended up going to college and studying business. And then I went to grad school, and that's really where my passion for cooking and my interest in business kind of joined forces, because I researched Oaxaca's culinary tourism industry in southern Mexico, and I worked with 5 different cooking instructors out there to see how they marketed their businesses to attract tourists. Because if you've never heard of Oaxaca, it's one of Mexico's culinary gems. People go there specifically to learn about the ingredients and the cooking techniques that are still used. A lot of them are very traditional cooking techniques. They still use the molcajete, the metate, tools like the molinillo, which I think over time kind of get lost through the generations. But this specific region in Mexico holds on to a lot of really beautiful cooking traditions, which is what drew me to that region. And after I finished grad school, I ended up, I'm just one of those people who love school, and I ended up taking a certificate class where I learned about social media and marketing, and we had to develop a blog, a fictitious blog, but I took the opportunity to create a real blog. And I went into it with the intention of just sharing all of my family recipes with, you know, friends and family initially. And then I realized that if it was on a website, I could actually open it up to the world. And fast forward a few years, it ended up turning into my business. I create, like Nedi said, I'm contracted by national companies to create recipes for them. I also launched my own line of products, and I curate different items from Mexico for my online shop, Lola's Mercadito. And I teach classes. Initially, I taught classes in person, and with everything going on in this world, I've had to adapt and go virtual with everything. But hopefully you're not tapped out with all things virtual. I do want this class to be as interactive as possible. So please, please, please ask questions, hop in, unmute yourself, or type your questions into the chat. I feel like that's the only way to keep these classes interactive, even if they're virtual. And I really, really do love, I don't mind being interrupted. I love answering questions. So with that, today we're going to be creating a few different recipes. We're going to be making tostadas de picadillo, which I make with ground turkey meat. But you can make it with ground beef, you can make it with ground bison, you can really make it with any type of meat that you like. Picadillo ranges in, it has a lot of different ingredients depending on which region of Latin America or the Caribbean you taste it. In Argentina, they put olives and raisins and typically stuff it into an empanada with a slice of a hard-boiled egg. In Cuba, they kind of make it a little similar too, with the olives, which add saltiness. Some countries add capers. So it just ranges all across. In Mexico, the traditional recipes typically call for potatoes. I see them always with potatoes and carrots and more of a tomato base. I read somewhere that that picadillo originated in Spain, that it's kind of a spin-off of something that was created in Spain that was made red with paprika. But in Mexico, the paprika was replaced with tomato. So I'm going to show you the ingredients that we have here. I make mine with carrots, and I already have some chopped, but I'm going to chop them with you as well, because you know, sometimes if you're new to cooking and you don't know what it means to dice into small cubes, I want to show you how I actually chop my ingredients. And then I have celery, which is optional. If you're not a huge fan of celery, you can actually incorporate whatever ingredients you want. The base of any picadillo is going to be onion, and then I have minced garlic. And my last, oh yeah, then I have my potato already soaking. I chopped some of it, and then I'm going to go ahead and chop one with you as well. And then I have 2 carrots, 2 stalks of celery. Here's my second one. Here's my second carrot. 2 Roma tomatoes. If you don't have fresh tomatoes on hand, you can always use the tiny can of tomato sauce. And then for my garnishes, I always like to add nice, fresh, crispy garnishes. So I have some shredded cabbage here. I like to use the purple cabbage because it adds really pretty color. And then some shredded carrots. And you can always add salsa. whatever you like. And then I have some corn tortillas, which we're gonna fry up. If you've never made your own tostadas or potato, or I'm sorry, corn tortilla chips, we're gonna do that. And then right here, over here, I have my beans, frijoles de la olla that I made, which we're gonna be transforming into refried beans. The way I made these beans is I literally make them in the crock pot overnight because I don't have the time or the patience to sit and just, you know, watch the water in my, wait, one sec. Hold on, let me see. You can't push the button. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I don't really have the patience to just watch the water in my pot all day. And if you make them in the crock pot, it's super easy. What I do is I use 16 ounces of dry beans. And so that's about roughly 2 cups, 10 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. My family, my aunt, she always uses lard because she says it gives it flavor, but I use olive oil. And then, yeah, I said the salt, the water, the olive oil, and the beans. I put that on low for 10 hours. And by morning, the house smells delicious and your beans are ready. So that's what I did last night. And I actually, if you can see in here, I actually leave the onion and the garlic in here because it infuses more flavor into your beans, even when you refry them. But if you are in a pinch or if you really don't have the time to make beans from scratch, you can always use canned beans. I would say maybe 2 cans is probably the equivalent, or 3 cans. But I do, since they don't have as much flavor as homemade beans, I would dice maybe 1/4 of an onion and saute that in your oil before you start to fry your beans. So with that, I am going to, let me see. Oh, the other thing that we're going to be making real quick is while everything is kind of cooking and all the flavors are combining, I'm going to be making an agua fresca. Agua frescas are the refreshing drinks that you find all throughout Mexico. They can be made out of fresh limes or watermelon or pineapple, but the ones that are typically in season year round are made with ingredients that you can find in your pantry. You don't have to have fresh offhand. So that would be like agua de Jamaica, hibiscus with dry hibiscus flowers, agua de tamarindo, tamarind, and horchata. So mine is kind of a spin on horchata, but it's made, I tasted this version in Oaxaca a few summers ago and I loved it because it tastes like horchata, but it's super easy to make with avena, oatmeal, agua de avena. And I sweeten mine with dates, and then I give it more flavor with vanilla and with cinnamon sticks. But they're different, and so this one's completely dairy-free, but there are different versions of it made with condensed milk or evaporated milk. So you can kind of experiment with your recipes once you learn how to make the base recipe. So right now I'm just gonna,
we have a question actually from the audience. Is this okay? Would you like me to hop in when they hop into the chat? Wonderful. Yep. Okay. So we, audience members were wondering if you have a recommended brand for canned beans and what kind of bean should someone purchase? I'm assuming pinto beans.
You know, I actually, with so with dry and canned beans, dry beans, I typically will get pinto, navy beans, canali beans, black beans. Honestly, I experiment with all different types of beans. The pinto beans I find to be a little bit drier when you're frying them, which that could be great for some recipes. But if you want them to be a little, have a little bit more creaminess and juice, you can maybe use the canali or navy beans, which you can find all of those canned. It's really just a matter of preference. I don't have a specific preference in terms of brands. I usually get whatever, you know, I try to get organic beans and either low sodium so that I can add my own salt to them. And I will usually rinse them. And when you do that, you have to kind of add some sort of either a veggie broth or a chicken broth when you're refrying them, because you're not going to have the liquid that you would find when you make your beans from scratch. So I really don't have a preference when it comes to canned beans, but I do try to stick to organic and low sodium so I can be in control of the salt. So the first step I'm going to do right here while I'm chopping is I'm going to start the onion on the stove. I already have my pot hot. It's getting hot. And I'm gonna lower that quickly so that this and the meat can already start to cook together. And I forgot to take out my meat. So you're gonna have about maybe a pound to a pound and a half of ground meat. And like I said, it can be made with ground beef, ground bison, ground turkey, whatever you find more accessible to you in terms of price and flavor. The thing that I love about picadillo is that it's really versatile. You can just get it out and then I'll wash out my hands right now. One sec, I'm gonna wash off my hands. So it's very quite versatile. The way you can serve it, like I said, in some areas, I can turn it a little this way. In some areas, it's made into stuffed into an empanada. In others, like in Cuba, it's typically served with rice and black beans. My flame is on medium right now. I have my turkey browning and I have my onion sauteing with it. So all those flavors kind of come together while we're chopping our other ingredients. But I thought this was a good recipe to make, especially for college students, because my niece, who is with me right now, she said that I'm gonna start chopping. She said that she, needed recipes that were budget friendly and really easy to make, and to make in a big batch, especially. You can see the way I'm cutting my celery. You want everything to be really small. Picadillo gets its name from the word picar, which means to chop or to mince. So that's what you're doing with all of your ingredients. I chopped most of them already. You can see, so what I do is I just get the long stick of celery, I cut it down the middle. The top part is already pretty small. The bottom part you might have to chop into smaller pieces. And then chop it like this. So it comes from the word picar, or to mince. And always includes a ground meat of some sort. But I'm sure now with everything vegetarian and vegan, there are probably recipes that are really good made out of soy or something else that's vegan. And with my carrot, you can peel them or you could just scrub them really well. And I do the same thing. I cut them in half and then I cut them into little, this is what I mean, to cube, into small cubes. It might not be cubes, but you get the point. So I'm gonna add my carrots into the pica. No, I'm not gonna add that yet because the meat's still browning. So once all your meat is brown is when you're gonna add your veggies. It doesn't have to be cooked completely because it's gonna continue cooking with the veggies into it, but you do want it to brown before adding them. And the good thing about turkey meat is it's not like pork that takes a lot longer to cook. It cooks fairly quickly. So this whole process of the meat shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. And the one thing with picadillo is the longer you let it simmer with all of the veggies, the more flavor it develops. So it's already starting to change color. I'm gonna raise the flame a tiny bit. And then I am going to go ahead and add the garlic to this as well. You don't want to add the garlic too early because you don't want it to burn. Because when garlic burns, it gets bitter. I'm gonna let that sit on top of the meat for a little bit. So you see all my veggies are already chopped right here. The only one that I'm missing is my tomato. And I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to cut. I know some of you probably already know how to do this, but there are people who don't, they're not as comfortable in the kitchen as others. So what I do is, here's 2 halves, and I like to put them face down. I'm gonna move this so you can see a little bit better. Yeah. And then I cut long ways. And this is how I cube my tomatoes. And I always use a serrated knife with tomatoes because you can see they have a lot of juice and they're soft, so they get a bit messy. But like I said, if you don't have fresh tomatoes, even if you just have a little bit of tomato paste, you can add that, or you can add tomato sauce. Or if you have whole stewed tomatoes or something like that that you're trying to use up, just get a couple of those and smash those into your picadillo. You can crush them up by hand if you want, or chop them with a knife, and you're still gonna get the same effect. So I have this, and then let's see. My picadillo is pretty brown. It's releasing some juices, which is totally fine too. I've also, the one thing I've learned about picadillo is some people make it really juicy, so it's almost like a soupy stew. And some people make it more like just like a ground beef that's sauteed with the veggies and it's a little drier. So all of that is a matter of preference. If you want it to be a little soupy, you can add some water or a little bit more tomato sauce or a broth, your favorite broth. But I think with all of these veggies, it ends up getting enough flavor from the veggies and enough juices from the tomatoes. So my meat is pretty brown already. I'm gonna go ahead and add my veggies to it. So here I have my carrots. My carrots go in first because they take longer to cook. But right now it doesn't really matter. I'm just gonna add.
And we have another question from the audience, Lola.
Uh-huh.
Avanicia asks, is there a reason why you hold with your knuckles and not your fingertips? I believe
Yes.
he's referring to the tomato.
Yes, I'm still trying to get used to it because that's the way everyone says you're supposed to cut everything to avoid cutting your fingers. And it is true. So right here, I do, hold the tomato, but I'll show you right now. I need to just finish cutting this tomato and then I'm gonna go on to my potato. So here's my long little strips. So if I'm cutting like this, you run the risk of cutting your fingers, especially if you have a really sharp knife. But if you cut like this, which feels kind of awkward initially, you're not gonna cut your fingers because you're just rubbing the knife against your knuckles. So that's just a tip when cutting that is good to know and good to get used to. It takes a bit to get used to, but it's good because you avoid accidents in the kitchen. And tomatoes are a little bit challenging typically to cut because of their juiciness. So that's fine. They don't have to be perfectly cubed because these are really gonna get juicy and fall apart in the picadillo. And the last veggie that I'm gonna chop here, you can see I already have my cubed potato, but I'm gonna go ahead and chop my last one for you. This is the second one of two. And I kind of do the same thing as I do with my tomato. Oh, this one's pretty hard. Okay, so I have my 4 little slivers right here. Do the same thing right here. Cut it into 3. Depends on how big the potato is. And then potatoes are really easy to cut with a good knife. And for cutting potatoes, I use a chef's knife, not a serrated knife. Bigger one, about 8 inches, is perfect for well, actually for anything. This is my favorite knife to use for everything except things like tomatoes. And potatoes, you can do all the chopping the night before if you know you're gonna have a busy day, and have them soaking in water. You do have to soak your potatoes in water, or rinse them and soak them, and you can take them out of the water right before you use them because they will get brown. I'm gonna just dump this water out, which gets rid of a lot of the starches that you find in potatoes. And I'm gonna add these to the picadillo as well. And that is pretty much everything that goes into your picadillo with the exception of your seasonings. I add salt, and I like to add kosher salt to when I'm cooking on the stove. I have about this was about a teaspoon, about 2 teaspoons, and you can taste that after. One thing I think I left out of my recipe that I sent you all that I do typically add to picadillo is thyme, tomillo. So I'm gonna add a little bit of that. And that's to preference because thyme does have a pretty strong flavor. So maybe 1/4 of a teaspoon to 1/2 a teaspoon tops. Otherwise it's gonna overpower the recipe. So now all I do here is, if you like pepper, you can add pepper, but I'm not gonna add pepper to this. So I have my onion, I have my garlic, potatoes, tomatoes, carrots, and what else? Let's see, and the meat, and celery. So this is essentially your picadillo, but now the most important part is letting all the flavors meld together. So I'm gonna move that over to the right so I can get started on our second, because that needs to just develop its flavor. So let's see. Nettie, do you want to start with one of the raffle questions? I don't know if she heard
Sounds great.
Oh,
I was fiddling with my microphone.
Okay.
So as we mentioned, we're going to be raffling off $25 gift cards to King Supers, and we're going to give you a trivia question. So please put your answer in the chat, and winners will get you that $25 gift card. You can shoot me your email address in a private message on Zoom. And as we mentioned before in the beginning, if you are a community member, we are trying to center student voices and student needs for these raffles. However, you know, we'll see how it goes. Okay, question number 1. The name picadillo derives from the Spanish word picar, which means to chop or mince. What is the main ingredient found in all picadillo recipes?
Take a little more specific proteins. Okay, what kind of meat? Steak. Okay, perfect. Ground beef.
All right. Awesome. So,
Okay.
Monique, please shoot me your email address and we will get you that $25 gift card. Thank you for participating, everybody.
Okay, next we are going to move on to, one thing about cooking is you need to know how long things take to cook, which I think for a novice cook, that's probably one of the hardest things to start to understand so that it becomes more of an instinct. But I know that the picadillo needs to develop flavor, so that's already on the stove. I covered it. Next, we're gonna move on to the frijoles because those need to cook down a little bit too, and those can be cooking while we prepare our tostadas. Okay, so now moving on to my frijoles, and you can see this is how much I made out of 2 cups of dry beans, which looks like a good amount. For my family, I have 2 kids and my husband living. I mean, we're all, you know, here quarantined together, and this will last me a week. But if you want to make a bigger batch, you can always double the recipe and freeze it. I like to put it in a Ziploc bag and lay it flat on a cookie sheet so that it doesn't take up a lot of space. If you just kind of plop it into your freezer, it's gonna freeze in a weird shape. But if you put it on the cookie sheet, it'll freeze completely flat so that you can, you know, stack a few bags next to each other. And the quart size bags are really nice for individual, like 2-person servings, or the bigger Ziploc bags for a family of 4 if you want to freeze like that. So right here, I already have my pan heated up with about 2 to 3 tablespoons of oil. You can see it's already starting to smoke. One key tool when making refried beans is a bean masher, which I have right here. And then I'm gonna have my, you're gonna hear the beans sizzle. The oil should be really hot when you put them in your pan. And I'm gonna just start putting them in. And you can see I'm including the onion that I use to cook them because that just simply gives more flavor into your beans. So I use, right here I have almost all of the beans. I think I'm gonna leave some space so that I can mash them. I'm gonna move this over here. And then there's a lot of different types of bean mashers. These are my 2 favorites. They're also, if you look them up, they're probably called potato, I don't know, mashed potato mashers, but I use them for beans. I make beans a lot more than I make potatoes. And if you want to infuse more flavor into your frijoles, you can saute a little bit of chorizo before you add your beans, and that adds really good layers of flavor. Or you can saute another little piece of onion, but I already have onion in here, so I'm not going to do that. Or you can even put a little chile de árbol or chile chipotle, and that adds really good flavor. And then I'm going to add a little bit of salt because I already tasted my beans and they're good for frijoles de la olla, but for refried, I like them to be a little bit saltier.
Hey Lola, I
And
have a
these are
question
really,
for you. So I see you're using like a cast iron pan.
yes.
Do you recommend specific pans for like for frijoles or for like the picadillo tostadas? Is there a certain type of pan you recommend?
You know, it's just a matter of preference. If you have a heavy pan for picadillo, I like that because you kind of avoid burning. When you have really thin pans, you can burn your onion, you can burn your meat. So I like to use thick, heavy pans, especially for something that I'm gonna cook slowly for for at least half an hour, so that nothing burns. For my beans, I've always just liked cast iron pans, and their cast iron pans are not too expensive. I've actually found all three of mine. I have three different sizes. I think this is a 10-inch, an 8-inch, and maybe like a 6-inch. I found them all at the local thrift stores for great prices, and they were already seasoned. So that means that they're already somewhat non-stick. The only thing I use non-stick pans for are things like eggs, or I do actually use them if I'm making chiles rellenos, because for some reason mine always stick to the pans if I'm using a stainless steel pan. But yeah, I like to use cast iron for almost all of my cooking, just because they're heavy and you don't burn things as quickly. So you can see the texture of my beans right here. This is a great texture, but I'm gonna let them continue to cook. You can see, I mean, just in a few minutes, we already created 2 unique recipes. I'm gonna move these to the side, and my stove got a little, you're gonna have to clean your stove after with all the beans and the frying, because the oil does, get all over the place. So I'm gonna put my beans on medium, like low medium, so that they start to absorb some of these liquids in them, because you want them. I learned in one of the classes when I was in Oaxaca, depending on how, what you're using the beans for, when you swipe your spatula like this, you don't necessarily want it to just run through. You want it to be a little bit drier. But also keep in mind that beans do dry as they cool. So they may not look as super dry when they're already mashed, but they're gonna dry a little bit more once you let them sit for a bit. And I love just having refried beans on hand for breakfast dishes or for burritos. They're also super inexpensive to make and to have on hand. And like I said, you can freeze the frijoles de la olla and then just make them into refried beans when you need them. They're also great when I make breakfast burritos. I like to make that with papas and chorizo, or huevos and chorizo. Those are great, just easy little meals to go to. Not that many people are going anywhere, but just to have on hand when you need to heat them up. So in this little pan, I have my oil that's already getting hot for my tostadas. And one thing that you always have to have for tostadas is your pan for draining them, because they're gonna have oil. And then if you have tongs, get mine. I have some tongs right here. And corn tortillas, these don't have to be fancy because you're just frying them up. If you have access to good tostadas from a grocery store, you can also use those. But if you don't, and you just have tortillas that are gonna go bad or get stale, like I always do, you can fry them up. And the oil should have been a little hotter, because if it's not hot, the tostadas will absorb a lot of the oil without getting as crispy as you want them. But you can see they're already starting to fry up. Okay. Let's see.
And we do have another question from Sonia. And Sonia asks, do you still offer trips to Mexico?
You know what? I never actually offered trips to Mexico. On my website, it says cooking in Mexico, and that's information on my website that I have about all of the cooking classes I've taken. So those are my personal recommendations, and just insights into the classes that I've taken in Mexico. But there are a number of organizations that offer classes. That offer trips. I don't organize the trips because it's just a lot of work to manage groups. But I know the Denver Botanic Gardens offered a trip to Oaxaca. I believe it was last year. And yeah, but I do have on my website, Lola's Guide to Oaxaca, where I have information about where I stayed. I have another blog post about the different bed and breakfasts that I've been there so many times, and I've stayed for extended periods of times. I go every summer with my son, with the exception of this summer with my children rather. So I have a lot of resources on my website in terms of, hotels, if you want to stay in a hotel, a bed and breakfast, you want to get out of the city of Oaxaca and go stay in a smaller town, which I've done too, which is a lot of fun. And then I have recommendations on the different cooking instructors. I've taken classes with Mexico's first top chef. He has his restaurant in Oaxaca, and I've taken a class with him. I've taken classes with the señoras from the different pueblos that a lot of the chefs from here that people know go take classes with these different cooking instructors. So I do highly recommend, when people are able to travel freely again, to put Oaxaca, Guanajuato. There's so many beautiful places to visit in Mexico, but all of my resources on my website focus on where I conducted my research. You can see here is one of the tostadas. Just gonna do a few more so I can show you how quick it is. That one took a little longer because the oil wasn't as hot, but this one's hot. The beans are boiling and getting a little drier. This is the effect that you want when you put your tostada, your tortilla in the oven. You want it to just start boiling up right away. And it's already getting crispy. So it shouldn't take more than 30 seconds to a minute to be ready. And like I said, the canned beans are a quick tip, time-saving tip. If you don't have time to make your own beans, you can still use canned beans for your refried beans, and you can use store-bought tostadas. I don't think store-bought tostadas are as bad as store-bought taco shells. I never buy store-bought taco shells. But the tostadas actually, sometimes I, like for ceviche or for things like this that are gonna be a little bit runny, I don't mind the store-bought because they do hold up their crispiness with ingredients that are a little more wet. Let's see. So you can see this tostada is nice and crispy already. And that's it. And if you are trying to avoid frying, you can always bake your tostadas. You can brush them with a little bit of oil and put them on a cookie sheet at about 300 and bake them in the oven until they're nice and crispy. Or in Oaxaca, they also just put them on a comal, which is a flat pan. You can use whatever flat pan you have if you don't have a cast iron comal, and just have it on low, and you can keep the tortillas on for a long time until they start to get crispy. And those are also great because they don't have the fats of the oil, but they get super, super crispy. They just take a little bit longer to make because you have to cook them slowly over the comal till they're crispy. So I think I'm gonna wrap it up with this one tostada. And let's see. There's one tostada. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off right now. And I think I'm gonna just give the beans, and I was originally going to assemble the tostada, but we have time to make our agua fresca right now. So I'm gonna move on to the agua fresca, then we're gonna move into my office so I can show you the altar and go over that. So let's see. Just be careful with your pan. You can always reuse the oil too, because all I do is strain it with the metal strainer into a glass jar and then use it when I'm frying again. But before we move on, do you wanna do another raffle, Nettie?
Let's go for it.
Okay.
The second question you gave me, Lola, is actually associated with altar building. Would you like me to ask that or hold off?
No, not the altar one. We could do one of the number ones. You want me to lead that one?
Yes. Okay. So we're going to ask the audience to pick a number from 1 through 50, and the first person to guess the number correctly will win. Lola will be writing a number down right now. She just did. So yeah, okay, so you've got 35, 21, 33, 43.
So whoever comes closest without going over. Oh, I already saw that someone got it. Caitlin, I put 37.
Awesome. Congratulations, Caitlin. Please, you can shoot Lola or you can shoot myself an email. Your email
Yes,
address?
you can send it to me, and that'll be for a $25 gift card for my Lola's Mercadito. You
Awesome.
can get whatever you like on there.
I will put Lola's email address into the chat box, Caitlin, for you to shoot her an email a little bit later, and congratulations.
Okay, so next we are going to move on to our agua fresca. Let's see, I'm just gonna make a little bit of room here so you can see what I'm doing. The most important, if you plan to make your own fresh juices, I would say that the most important tool you wanna have is a blender and a bowl or something to strain your aguas into, because a lot of them you do strain. And for this particular agua, I actually strain it with one of these nylon bags, because my agua de avena, I want it to be really, really just clean, milky, kind of like a milk. You don't want it to be a thick nectar type of juice. But if you don't have one of these, you can use a strainer, or you can use cheesecloth or a cotton dish towel. That might be a little hard though, because if it's really tight weave. But I would do this if I didn't have the nut bag. So like I said, the ingredients for agua de avena, this really reminds me, if you like horchata, you will really like this. And it's a lot easier because horchata is made with rice that you need to soak at least 4 hours in really hot water, or overnight preferably. But this one, we're just using oatmeal, avena. And then, like I said, my sweetener, you can use sugar, you can use, I see your question, nylon bag. I just ordered mine online because I've tried to find them at natural grocers, at the grocery stores, and it's hard. So just order it on Amazon if you can, or any natural grocery store. So I have my dates, I have my cinnamon, and then I have my vanilla extract, which I also sell on my Mercadito. I make this and I infuse it with vanilla beans straight from Veracruz, Mexico. So the first step.
Sonia asks if you can toast the oatmeal. Have you ever done that?
Oatmeal. I've actually never toasted it, but I'm sure it'll just add a little bit of toastiness. You just want to make sure you don't burn it, because it's kind of like with coconut. When you burn the coconut, then you kind of ruin the flavor. So just make sure you watch it. But it tastes really good without toasting it, so you don't even have to go through that step. So I have, typically with a lot of my aguas frescas, I start with 4 cups of water and 1 cup of whatever it is that I'm like, a cup of, I guess with fruits, I'll use 2 cups, 1 to 2 cups. But for this one, I use oatmeal. First, before adding the oatmeal, I add my dates, because you want the water to get the sweetness from the dates. I add about 4 inches of cinnamon. And if you don't have cinnamon sticks, you can always use about a teaspoon of powdered cinnamon. And then I'm gonna add, if you like vanilla, you can add this. And this is just so much more budget friendly if you're making your, here in the school, in the States, they call this oat milk, kind of like how they have almond milk and rice milk and all those different milks that are not milk, that are dairy free. But I mean, this is an agua de avena. In Mexico, we've been drinking this forever, but here, you know, big companies change the name and then claim it as their own. But this is the OG oat milk, agua de avena. So I'm gonna blend the cinnamon, the dates, and the vanilla first. Let me just do that quickly.
Can you remind us how much vanilla?
And you do this first because, like I said, you want the cinnamon and the dates and the vanilla flavors to really infuse into the water, because you don't want to really blend it for super long when you add your oatmeal. Otherwise, it can get a little slimy. So I'm gonna go ahead and
And Lola,
oatmeal.
can you remind the audience how much vanilla you put in there?
Put a teaspoon of vanilla.
Great.
A teaspoon of vanilla, about a 4-inch piece of cinnamon, 4 dates, and let's see, what else? But if you don't have the cinnamon stick, you can use about a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. And then this is 1 cup of oatmeal, avena. You just add this in. And what I love about this drink is you can use it as a milk substitute if you are lactose intolerant, or if you're just trying to avoid dairy. It's really good mixed into coffee. But it's also really refreshing. So in Mexico, they serve it over ice like they would any agua fresca. I'm gonna go ahead and just give this a really quick blend. You don't wanna over blend it because then it can get slimy. So I'm gonna do it quickly. That's it. I've seen a lot of different recipes for this. Some people say to soak the oats, and that just doesn't work because it gets super slimy. So I'm not sure where these people learned how to make their aguas. So now I have this. I have my big bowl or container that you're gonna strain everything into. And this is probably the most time-consuming part if you're making any of your own aguas or milks from home. With most aguas, I literally just use this to strain. If I'm making a strawberry agua fresca, pineapple, cucumber, I use this because it's gonna catch most of the skins that you don't want in there. But with this one, like I said, it has a lot smaller grains in it. So you don't want those to get into your, you can see the oats coming out kind of grainy. You don't want that in your milk. So with this bag, you just kind of squeeze everything through, and you can see how it already is starting to look more like a milk or like an horchata. And if you want a little bit more flavor, you can also add almonds or cashews if you want it to be a little bit thicker or concentrated. But I think this is just one of the easiest aguas that you can make with ingredients that a lot of people have at home. The cinnamon and the vanilla are actually optional. And if you don't have dates, you can use regular cane sugar, you can use agave, honey, condensed milk if you want to add that kind of flavor to it. But I like to use dates because it's just a natural sweetener. And it's really good with these simple ingredients. And I get my dates in a big container from Costco. It's typically the cheapest way to get it. I'm just gonna rinse my hands out quickly. So you saw that recipe was super easy. And I typically put my aguas in a big jar, I'm sorry, not a jar, a pitcher, a jarra, because I add ice to them. But for my agua de avena, I will put it in a container with a lid because it tends to settle and you want to be able to shake it up when you're ready to drink it. And like I said, you can use it as a milk substitute or pour it over ice as just a regular agua fresca. So that's our third recipe. And now I think I'm gonna go ahead and assemble a couple of, or maybe just one tostada. I wanna take up the whole plate. Let's see, I'm gonna move my picadillo over here. So that was, the picadillo was on the stove for maybe about 20 to 30 minutes. I would, if I was making this for my family, I would leave it on the stove at least another 30 minutes, but it is ready already. I just like it to develop a little bit more flavor. But all the veggies are nice and soft. Yeah, it's ready, but I like it to cook a little longer just to develop more flavor. Low and slow is always good. So the way I would assemble my tostada would be, I just need the tostadas right there. So you have your tostada here. And with most tostadas, the first layer is beans. So you can see the beans are still a little runny, but that's okay. They can still, I would leave these on a little bit longer too. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna turn these back on because we can leave these on for a little longer. But I'm just gonna try and get the beans here so that they're not as wet.
And we have another question from the audience, Lola. If you're using agave or honey to substitute, about how much would you use?
I would start with, it doesn't sound like a lot, but I would start with a tablespoon and taste it. And if you need more, add another tablespoon. So start with maybe a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons. The most I use in aguas frescas is typically about a 1/4 cup of honey or agave or sugar, depending, and it always depends on how sweet you like it. In Mexico, I think that the aguas frescas are really a little too sweet for my taste, but a lot of people love them like that. I just don't drink that many things with sugars. So my palate's kind of not used to that much sweetness. So just start with a little bit, a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, and taste as you go. Aguas frescas, the one thing to note is that they should taste like the ingredient that you're working with. It should taste like avena. It should taste like strawberry. It shouldn't taste like a water that has strawberry slices in it or water with cucumber slices. It should have a really bold flavor of whatever fruit or ingredient you're infusing into it. With a hint of, they should be, I would say, more on the sweet side than on the not sweet side, but I keep mine a little bit less sweet, just so you know. So if you're looking up the recipes on my website and you think that you need a little bit more sweetness, you can always add, but start kind of like with salt. You want to start with less, and then because you can always add more sweetness, but you don't want to water it down if you add too much sugar. So now I'm going to add my little layer of picadillo, and like I said, you can stuff this into an empanada. You can make it into a burrito with your beans if you have a lot left over. You can serve it along rice. I like to make like a Mexican white rice or a garlic rice. So you can put some of the juices onto it. And then you can get a little closer. And then I really love to use the red cabbage for nice freshness and crunch. And then if you have little shredded carrots, these are all optional, but I think they make your tostadas look really pretty, and they're ingredients that are not super hard to find. And then I would top it with a good salsa. That's how I would serve mine. So here's your tostada, here's your agua de avena, you have your beans going still. I'm gonna cover my picadillo so that it continues to cook a little bit longer and develop more flavors. And the thing I love about Mexican cooking is just, you know, it's all to taste. Once you develop once you become more comfortable in the kitchen, you start to experiment with your own flavors and create your own versions of these recipes, which is what I really love. And probably why I avoided baking, because baking was always so precise, but now I love baking too. So I like the flexibility of cooking with Mexican, you know, just Mexican dishes that are super flexible. And then I also love baking. So with that, we have I showed you how to make your ingredients. I'm gonna move on to my altar so that I can show you the different altar items and the significance of them. And then we can ask another raffle question. I'm gonna just walk you over there because that's the only way to really show you. Oh, Nettie, you're a professional baker?
I did once run a pie company for about 1.5 years, and I did professional baking and professional wedding cakes and things like that.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's hard work. Okay, so now we're in my office. I typically set up my altar in my dining room or in my front entry table. But this year I wanted to do a little something different, and I just took off some of the books from my bookshelves and I set it up here in my office where I could see it every day. And let's see, just a little bit of history. Dia de los Muertos, also known as Day of the Dead or just Dia de Muertos, is rooted in Mesoamerican culture and was likely first observed by the Aztecs in festivals that celebrated the ruler of the underworld. Nowadays, on November 1st and 2nd, the living honor the dead by visiting grave sites, building altars, and preparing their favorite foods in order to encourage a visit to the terrestrial world. Creating an altar is one of the most significant traditions during Dia de los Muertos festivities, both in Mexico and in my home. I started creating my home altar 10 years ago. My father passed away in 2000, so he passed away in 20 years ago. But it wasn't until I moved to Old Town San Diego that I really learned about this tradition, which I didn't grow up with. Even though my father was from Mexico, it wasn't something that he or his family really observed. But when I moved to Old Town San Diego, they have a huge, beautiful Day of the Dead festival, and that's when I learned about it. And I invited friends and family to, add pictures of the people who they wanted to honor on my home altar. And then every year I've been doing it since then, and it's become one of my favorite, probably my favorite holiday. So each and every element of an altar has special significance and is meant to remember and celebrate our loved ones who have left the mortal world. The real beauty behind an altar is that it can be simple or elaborate and can also be built communally or individually. So just to go over the different items on an altar, food and drinks are really important. There's several dishes that are commonly associated with Dia of the Dead: rice, mole, chocolates, fall fruits, pumpkin desserts. A lot of times you'll see people sharing recipes for calabazas en tacha this time of year, especially for altars. pan dulce, pan de muerto, and the festive plates are left out, and they're meant to satisfy the hunger after a long journey to the living world. So you can see here in this little cubby, I have pan de muerto, and pan de muerto is a semi-sweet bread which is baked in the shape of bones, and it's left as a gift for the spirits. It's also a welcoming item that represents the host's generosity. In southern Mexico, where I studied, there's a lot of towns that really go all out when it comes to Day of the Dead and creating their altars. So typically you'll go up to someone's house to see their altar, and they'll serve you pan de muerto, and they'll serve you hot chocolate, just because you came to visit. So calaveras de azúcar, I have a lot of different versions. This one I actually made out of sugar. Then there's also the catrinas, and you can see a lot of different versions of calaveras right throughout my altar. But to give you a little background on those, these friendly faces symbolize the spirits being honored and their individual personalities. They can be made out of sugar, chocolate, paper mache. This one is made out of paper mache by an artist who actually, I don't know if any of you visited the Catrinas at the Denver Botanic Gardens a few years ago. His name is Ricardo Soltero. He's a really amazing artist from Mexico, but living in LA. So they could be made of paper mache, wood, or any other material. In pre-Columbian times, Aztecs used amaranth seeds instead of sugar to make the skulls, but as we know, once the Spaniards arrived, they tried to do away with any indigenous practices. They even banished the growing of amaranth, so they could no longer make their sugar skulls out of amaranth seeds anymore. So edible skulls are often consumed by the kids after the celebration and are an example of a Mexican's ability to celebrate, mock, and even play with death. Salt, I have salt right over here in a little bowl. You always leave that out. It represents the purification of the soul. And I've also recently heard that it's meant to preserve, which we know salt preserves meats and different things. Water, I have my little cantarito with water right over there in the back. You see, water is left out to quench the spirit's thirst after a long journey, and it represents the element of water. I also have a bottle of mezcal right there with some shot glasses, because some of the people in my family like to enjoy their spirits, their alcoholic spirits as well. So if that was what your family members liked, or if they liked to drink a specific beverage or soda, you could leave that out for them. The most basic elements of an altar, though, this is really small compared to some of the ones in Mexico, but I know if you've never built an altar, it can look really big and overwhelming to create something like this. But the most basic elements of an altar include photos, flowers, and candles. So if you just put a photo out, a candle out, and some flowers, that's a great way to honor someone. I have a friend who sent me a picture. She was embarrassed because she said she didn't really create anything fancy, but it was a picture of her little dog and a little vase with flowers, and that was perfect. That's all you really need to remember the person or animal or anything that you're honoring. Flowers, you can see I created kind of an arch out of these artificial marigolds, because here in Colorado, it's not that easy to find real marigolds. So the most popular flower on Day of the Dead altars is the cempasúchil, which is the marigold. It represents the earth. Their bright orange color and fragrance are believed to help guide souls back to the living world for this evening. Elaborate altars include a walkway made of marigolds that begins at the entrance of a home and ends at the altar. And you'll see this a lot in Mexico, where the altars literally are, yards or feet long, with fresh marigolds that are sprinkled all across the floor to light the way. If marigolds aren't available, any fresh or even artificial flowers are great substitutes. White flowers represent heaven. Purple flowers are the traditional color of mourning. Candles, I have different candles throughout my altar, but I have a little battery operated ones here because I do not want to burn my house down like I did one year with a bunch of paper tissue flowers on my altar. I avoid using the veladoras now because I almost had a really bad accident. But candles represent the soul's ascension into heaven and our burning love for our deceased relatives. They also help light the way toward the land of the living and represent the element of fire. Incense, so I have copal here, copal or incense, which you burn, and the fragrance comes out of here. This candle is actually a marigold scented candle. I have a little bit more salt here also, but Candles or incense is sometimes included on an altar to ward off bad spirits and purify the soul. And then candles, like I said, they help illuminate the way. Then an arch above an altar, which I tried to kind of create here. In Mexico, they would be made with fresh marigolds. The arch above the altar is usually, it represents the entry into the world for the dead are coming from the land of the dead into the land of the living. So this is their entry point. And then let's see, papel picado. You can see some papel picado here. This is tissue paper. It's very delicate. It's made not to last forever, just like us. And it represents the union between life and death. It's a delicate tissue paper that also represents the fragility of life and the element of wind. And it's believed that you'll know when the spirits come for a visit when you see it kind of flowing, even if there's not wind blowing through your windows, which is why you would hang it, freely so that wind can pass through it, not against a wall. Like you wouldn't hang it on the back part of this wall. You want it to be free on the string. Monarch butterflies, which you can see here. I have butterflies here. I have little butterflies all throughout my altar because they remind me of my grandma. But butterflies also migrate to Mexico each fall, and they're believed to be the spirits of ancestors coming back for a visit. And I also have dogs on every little part of my altar. Here you can see a little mini. Here I have one for my dad. And then I have another little guy back there. So dogs are believed to guide the ancestral spirits to their final resting place in the afterlife. Kind of like even in the living right now, in the world of the living, dogs always accompany someone, and they have a lot of people consider them their best friends. Then the final elements are just personal objects and mementos, which serve as reminders of the person being honored. It can be anything, literally a toy, a tool, clothing item, snack, or drink. So you can see here on the altar for the inocentes, the little babies, or the children who have died before their time, I have little Mexican toys, the little luchador, a piñata for the birthdays that they didn't get to celebrate. I have candies back here. And then for my father, he always used to take us on bike rides, so I have this funny little guy. And then I have this, this guy looks kind of creepy. You can see he has a pata de gallo, and then like a cat hoof. But this always reminds me of Guanajuato. It's a legend that we grew up hearing about in Guanajuato, this devil with 2 different feet. And that's where my father was from, Guanajuato. So I have that for him. And then I have a little boot because he always used to wear cowboy boots, and a little chia pet, which is an inside joke. And here you can see all the little mini, this is my mini altar with all things mini. But you can see they're festive, they're musicians, they're playing, they're ready to welcome, welcome our dearly departed in a festive way. We're not here to be sad or somber. We're here to remember them and be happy. I have chicken and mole, which is a popular dish. I don't put real food out because I don't want, to get bugs or anything. A little pan de muerto, but in Mexico you would find real foods on the altars, and they say that they actually they don't eat them after the people who put them out don't eat the food because it's believed that the spirits actually take out all the flavor from the food, so you're not supposed to eat it. And then before I move on, I guess we could do one more raffle, and then I'm just gonna wrap it up with one more thing I wanted to show you. This raffle, you can ask the question, Nettie, about the one that you mentioned.
Sounds great. That altar is beautiful, and I mentioned in the chat actually also, Lola, that it's been a family tradition of mine too to go to the Old Town San Diego Day of the Dead celebration. My whole family lives on the San Diego-Tijuana border, and it's stunning. It's a really stunning experience.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I used to live literally right above the cemetery where the procession ends, so I really miss it.
Yeah, that cemetery is so beautiful. Okay, next raffle question. And just put your answers in the chat, and the first, is it the first person to kind of get 3 accurate?
Yes.
Okay, great. Name 3 altar items that are associated with the dead.
With Day of the Dead, with altars, yeah.
Yes. I suppose the dead is a little general.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dia de los Muertos altar specifically.
I think we saw a few come through. Do you see
So
anyone who got the first 3?
I believe Vanessa, Huiarco, calaveras, papel picado, and candles.
Okay.
Renee said
Pastel, because I'm a sister. We can do the next person.
Oh, you can pick the next one if you want, Nettie, because that's my sister.
Okay, so the next person is Renee. She said sugar skulls, flowers, and candles.
Yep. Mhm.
So yeah, let's go with Renee. Although we had a lot of fabulous entries. So thank
Okay.
you all for participating.
Okay, so before our very last raffle item and wrapping up the class, I just wanted to show you, if you don't have the desire to create a big altar of your own, or even if you don't have the space, I know a lot of people just don't have the space to put an altar even on a little corner or a table. I've created this one I call my Árbol de la Vida, Tree of Life, where I display photos. If you just have if you can get a dry tree branch and pop it into a vase, that can work. So I have pictures of my great grandparents here and my grandpa, and then I put, these are a craft that I worked on in a earlier class with little mini buñuelos made out of tortillas with cinnamon and sugar that are really good. If you have children at home, this is a fun way to get them involved. I've had my son involved with the Day of the Dead since he's 6 years old, and he's been helping me since he was just a little baby, and now he even creates his own mini altars when I give him different items to work with. But I have butterflies on here. I have different Mexican ornaments and things that remind me of the people who I'm honoring. So if you have access to just even a dry tree branch and a vase, you can kind of do that. You can weave the pictures into the branches or put little clips onto them. And this can just be your beginner, you know, your entry point into creating a home altar. And then you'll just see that once you get into the tradition, if you're not already into it, it's just going to develop and grow over time. And you're going to end up just embracing it and creating a bigger, more beautiful altar every year. And every year I say, I'm gonna go small. I don't even want to do an altar because it's a lot of work. I typically start mine, thinking about mine at the beginning of October. I start assembling it and putting it together mid-October, and then I'll just work on it little by little over the course of the 2 weeks leading up to Day of the Dead. And then I'll probably take it down in the week after, just so that I have it on display a little bit longer than just the few days where people celebrate Day of the Dead. But that's everything, and I think we do have one more giveaway. So if you want to write down a number between 1 and 50, I think this is going to be the final one where people have to guess a number between 1 and 50, and my niece is going to write down a number.
And
Okay.
this last prize will be for a gift card to the Mercadito that Lola runs.
Yes. So far, nobody. Excuse me. So do you want to just do the closest without going over, Nettie? I think did someone already pick 35?
Whichever one, yeah. We've got a number of entries. No one has gotten it correct yet, though, right?
Correct. No.
So yeah, if you want to take the closest one, we have 28, 14, 18, 35, 27, 11,
Oh,
7.
okay. You said 38 was one of them?
Well, we have 35.
Okay, the closest one is probably going to be, it's 43. So the closest is what, 38? Oh, there was no
35,
38?
I believe, would be the closest, and that goes to Carrie.
Okay.
Carrie Ninneman, congratulations. If you, I'm going to actually just email you or shoot you Lola's email address for you to check in with her after this class. Thank you.
Yes, or you can just email me at, can you type in my email? It's lola@lolascocina.com, and I will let you know how to proceed regarding your prize. Yeah, so that's a wrap. Hopefully you learned something new, whether you're you've been, you know, celebrating Day of the Dead for many years, or it's new to you, and whether you're an excellent cook or a novice cook, I hope that you learned something new. And if you have any questions, you can always send me an email or shoot me a message. My website is lolascocina.com, and on all social media, I'm probably more active on Facebook and Instagram. My handle is Lola's Cocina, and then my shop handle is Lola's Mercadito.
Lola, I want to say thank you so much for being with us and sharing your skills and your passion for cooking, and really your passion for celebrating the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, with us. I also want to send a huge thank you to Rachel, who's on the call with us tonight, for getting us connected. Really, if it wasn't for her, then yeah, we wouldn't be having this event this evening. I want to make one quick plug with you all. The Colorado Day of the Dead Festival has the largest altar in the country, which you can find if you Google Colorado Day of the Dead Festival. It's open on weekends. It's $10 for adults, $5 for students. They are doing, oh, thank you, Rachel. Rachel just put the Eventbrite into the chat. You can purchase tickets through Eventbrite. They are taking COVID precautions, but I want to take a second to acknowledge Norberto Mojardin, who really put this altar together, really just out of his passion and his love for Dia de los Muertos, and also recognize Rachel Garcia, who's curating the event as well. You can see that the largest altar in the country, by clicking on that link that Rachel posted into the chat. Purchase tickets and go out and see that altar, and continue to help us celebrate this amazing event and our beautiful culture that will go on through 11/22. Lola, I just want to say thank you again so much for spending time with us, again, sharing your passion for cooking and celebrating our culture. And really, I mean, that looks amazing, and I can't wait to be a part of that and begin cooking some of those things in the house. Thank you all for participating this evening and being part of this. We will, again, I mentioned earlier that this is recorded, and once everything is ready to go, so it will go up onto the Center for Identity and Inclusion YouTube page, but we will also share it with all of you so you can reference back to the ingredients, reference back to the agua fresca and things like that. So again, thank you, Lola. Thank you to all of your tech support. I want to say thank you to Nettie for participating and facilitating tonight's event. Thank you to our sponsor for Latinx Student Services, and to the Gender Institute for Teaching and Advocacy. Thank you to our collaborative departments, Chicano Studies at MSU Denver, the Center for Multicultural Excellence and Inclusion at MSU Denver, and the Student Life at the Community College of Denver. Thank you everyone for joining in this evening, and we look forward to sending you this recording so you can reference, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. So thank you so much. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.